So I am recording my homily for Palm Sunday of 2017, and I just have a short homily this weekend because we had a lot of readings and processions. And so you remember in the very first reading that we did before Mass, when we were getting ready to process into the church, we did the reading of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And it's a magnificent fulfillment of one of the prophecies of how the Messiah would enter into Jerusalem, this new king. But as we know, that's not the whole story, right? And so during the Mass, we also then go into the Passion, and so we have the reading of the entire narrative of the Passion of Jesus' final days here on earth. And so I want to kind of bring it all together and talk about a couple elements, actually 3 elements. And they're very simple, but just things that we could reflect on during this Holy Week. The first is sincerity. And so sincerity is when our desires, what we desire in our heart, what we truly desire, also comes out in our thoughts, words, and actions, right? Well, obviously they're already in our thoughts, but in our words and our actions. And so the external is an accurate reflection of the internal. For example, if I say I'm having a great day, but I'm really not, that's not sincere, right? It doesn't accurately reflect how I feel at this time. And so sincerity, I think, is a very important quality. The opposite of sincerity is hypocrisy. There's a duplicity, there's a lack of correspondence between what my desires are, what my thoughts are, and my feelings, and to what I actually say and do. And so the Pharisees are really actually a good example of this duplicity or hypocrisy, because they may put on the appearance of loving the people, but in reality, as you would see with how Jesus interacts with the Pharisees and his frustrations with them, is they often are simply thinking of maintaining their own control, their power structures, etc., etc. Now, we all can do that in our insecurities, right? Because we have our little niche, we have our territory, and we want to defend it. And so in our insecurities, we in the end stop thinking about the big picture or even about love of others, and we start just worrying about ourselves. So sincerity is very important. Are there examples of sincerity in the readings today? There are, right? Just go to the very beginning when Jesus is coming into Jerusalem and all the people are coming, they're flocking out to see him, and they're putting their garments on the road, they're breaking off branches off the trees and they're putting them down on the road. I really believe they were sincere that that they desire to have Jesus be their new king. They desire the Messiah and they want to be open to it. They're tired of the corruption of the Romans, they're tired of the oppression, and they're probably also tired of recognizing that their leaders are not really the prophetic and the passionate and sincere leaders that they deserve. So when Jesus comes, I really believe the people were sincere. Who else is sincere in our readings today? Peter, right? Peter's very sincere. He's a passionate man. He wears his feelings on his sleeve, right? When Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me, Peter's emphatic. I will never, ever deny you. I will never betray you, Lord. And he says, yes, you will. You're going to actually do it tonight. And Peter's like, no, I would, even if I had to die, I would not do it. And I believe he's sincere. He really believes that in his heart. Who else is sincere? Pontius Pilate. Read the readings about Pontius Pilate. Now, I know if you go back and you read the historical accounts of Pontius Pilate in the non-scriptural references, Pontius Pilate's not a very nice guy, right? But in the readings today, he seems to truly be trying to get Jesus out of this jam. He's trying to save his life. And I believe he was sincere about it. He didn't really want to put Jesus to death because he truly did not understand the mindset of those who were shouting out, crucify him. So I believe he was sincere. I think there's a certain level of sincerity in even Judas Iscariot. Not before, not as he's doing the betrayal, but afterwards. Read the account when he realizes that he did something wrong. And so he throws the silver pieces back into the temple because he recognizes that what he did was a mistake. And I believe there was a sincerity in that. Jesus, right? Jesus is sincere. Everything he does corresponds to what his desires are. When he's in the garden and he's praying in such an honest way, he's sincere. Lord, if this cup could pass from me, but not as I will, as you will. Right? There's just dripping with sincerity. But here's the problem. Sincerity is not enough. In our own lives, we can be very sincere, but it's not enough. Because look at the crowds. They were sincere, but when push came to shove, when it came time for Jesus to reveal what his kingdom would look like, they were not going to stand by him. In fact, they could have been some of the very same people who only the next day would be shouting, only the very next week would be shouting, crucify him. So sincerity wasn't enough. It doesn't maintain us when life gets really, really difficult, when that cross gets really heavy. Look at Peter. Sincerity just wasn't enough. Now he was going to grow, but at that moment it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for Pontius Pilate. It wasn't even enough for Pontius Pilate to have his wife come to him and say, look, I had a dream about this righteous man. Don't do what they're asking, right? It wasn't enough. It didn't give him what he needed to make the right decisions. Judas, it wasn't enough. He despaired. With Jesus, it was. I should take that back. It wasn't enough, but he still models the other things that we need. So sincerity is the first thing we need, but it's not enough. What else do we need in our life? We need maturity. We need spiritual maturity. And that requires work, right? We've been doing the whole life confession program of Father Bill Watson in our parish, and it's been marvelous to see the fruits of it, but it is work. It is hard. It's not just spending half an hour a day in prayer. It's digging very deep and allowing Jesus to bring things to the surface and to heal, and it is work. And so spiritual maturity often comes in growing from our sinfulness, in recognizing the mistakes that we have made and having the humility then to say, I desire to grow. Peter at that moment did not have it. He did not have that spiritual maturity, but he would get it. He would recognize his sin, his failure, his weakness, and then he would grow from that. Right? Judas would not develop that spiritual maturity. He would despair and he would abandon Jesus. We live in a time full of Judas Iscariots. And I don't mean that necessarily that we're in a world full of Catholics who seek and desire to betray Jesus, but they do nonetheless. Right? Judas didn't desire to do, I think, what he did. Deep down he desired to do what our human nature desires, and that's God. But he did not open his heart to that spiritual maturity to grow from the sins that he had made and then change. Okay, spiritual maturity, very important. I was talking to a group of priest friends, and we were talking about hearing confessions through this Lenten season, and one of the priest friends, he says he was just really discouraged that that there were people coming into confession after having not gone to confession in a year, and then telling him they have no sin. And he's like, come on. I mean, the greatest people, even Pope Francis goes to confession I think it's once a month, or was it twice a month? I think they were saying he goes twice a month to confession. Pope Francis, right? Pope John Paul went every week. I mean, you're talking about very holy, good people who went to confession and had sin. So the problem is not, or it's not like we're just trying to make them feel guilty and they really don't have sin. They don't have spiritual maturity to be able to look in, to see the sin, and then grow from that, right? To have that confidence with God, to grow from our mistakes. And not just from our mistakes, right? Don't get me wrong. We don't just learn from our mistakes. We learn from others. We learn from the example of the people around us. We seek, we desire, we grow, we want to learn. So that's spiritual maturity. And so that was something that was very much needed for all of us, right? Or it is needed for all of us. Sincerity, great, important, necessary, but not enough. Spiritual maturity, very important, necessary, beautiful, difficult, but also not enough, right? What else is needed? Well, you need the umbrella. You need that which encompasses everything, that puts flesh on the bones, right? And that's love. And so you look at Jesus Christ, you see his sincerity, you see his spiritual maturity, because he was saying, not my will be done, but yours, right? So you see that spiritual maturity, that he perseveres, but it's also in love. Peter demonstrated some courage and some strength, right? At first, he tried to defend Jesus. He pulls out his sword and he attacks the soldiers, and he cuts off the ear of one of the soldiers. And Jesus rebukes him because he's saying, that is not the path. That is not how we as Christians are going to win the world over. That is not love, right? So, to watch through Holy Week, to watch how Jesus Christ manifests love on a very, very deep level. The hardest form of love is also the most beautiful form of love, and it's the love of enemy. And Holy Week is about that. Holy Week is about divine love of enemy. How Jesus Christ, who could render judgment on us, he could destroy us, he could obliterate us, but he chooses to love us. And he has a great hope for us in that. As we go through Holy Week, if you're watching this before we reach Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and the Easter Vigil on Saturday night, and Easter Masses on Sunday, I say go to everything you possibly can. Do not miss anything if you can be there, right? And sometimes, young families will say, well, I got a bunch of kids. They can't stay up that late. Put them in their pajamas, bring them to Mass, right? Let them fall asleep. But come, because as soon as we begin to miss some of the events, we may start to miss some of those necessary steps that happen through the course of this week, whether it's developing sincerity, spiritual maturity, or, as the umbrella is, a much deeper love. Because this week is what transforms our world and is meant to transform our lives. All right, blessings on your Holy Week. God bless you.